This is the story of Alexander the Great. He was a king, a soldier, and a conqueror. Before he was 33 years old, he had built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. He never lost a single battle. And then, at the height of his power, he suddenly died, and no one is completely sure why. So sit back, listen slowly, and learn English with the dark story of Alexander the Great. Alexander was born more than 2,000 years ago in a land called Macedonia in the north of Greece. His father was a powerful king named Philip. His mother was a strong and mysterious queen named Olympias. From the very beginning, people felt that this boy was different. His mother even told him that he was not an ordinary child, that he came from the blood of gods and heroes. Alexander believed her, and that belief would drive him for his whole life. There is a famous story from when Alexander was just a boy. A trader brought a huge, wild horse to his father's court. The horse was beautiful, but it was so wild that no man could ride it. Everyone tried, and everyone failed. The king was ready to send the animal away. But young Alexander saw something the others did not. He saw that the horse was afraid of its own shadow. So he gently turned the horse toward the sun, so it could not see the shadow, and he calmly climbed on its back. The whole court went silent. His father, the king, had tears in his eyes, and he said, "My son, find a kingdom big enough for you, because Macedonia is too small." Alexander named the horse Bucephalus, and it carried him into battle for the rest of its life. To prepare his brilliant son, King Philip brought in the greatest teacher in the world, the philosopher Aristotle. For years, Aristotle taught Alexander about science, about politics, about courage, and about the stories of great heroes. Alexander especially loved the old tales of warriors, and he carried those stories in his heart, always dreaming of glory. Then, suddenly, everything changed. At a great celebration, King Philip was murdered, stabbed by one of his own guards. In an instant, Alexander was no longer just a prince. At only 20 years old, he was the king of Macedonia. And many people thought this young king would be weak and easy to control. They were very, very wrong. Some cities saw the young king and thought it was their chance to break free. They rebelled. Alexander answered with terrifying speed and force. He crushed the rebellion completely, and to send a message to the whole world, he destroyed one famous city almost entirely. The message was clear: do not test this young king. After that, no one in Greece dared to stand against him. But Greece was never Alexander's real dream. His eyes were already looking east, toward the greatest empire on earth. That empire was Persia. It was enormous, rich, and powerful, far bigger than anything Alexander ruled. It was led by a king named Darius, who commanded armies so large they seemed impossible to beat. And yet, with a much smaller army, Alexander crossed the sea and marched straight into Persian land. To his soldiers, it seemed like madness. To Alexander, it was his destiny. Along the way, he reached a city with a famous legend. There was an ancient knot tied so tightly and so cleverly that no one had ever been able to undo it. An old prophecy said that whoever could untie this knot would rule all of Asia. Many great men had tried for years, pulling and struggling, and all had failed. Alexander looked at the knot for a moment. Then he simply drew his sword and cut straight through it. The problem that had defeated everyone for generations, he solved in one bold second. That was exactly how his mind worked. Then came the great battles against Darius and his massive army. Again and again, Alexander was outnumbered, sometimes badly. And again, he won. He was not just brave, he was brilliant. He always found the weak point. He always struck faster than his enemy expected, and he always led his men from the very front, riding into the danger himself. At the final great battle, the mighty King Darius lost his nerve and fled the field, abandoning his own army. Later, Darius was killed not by Alexander, but by his own men who betrayed him. And just like that, the greatest empire on earth belonged to Alexander. His power was now almost beyond imagination. He marched into Egypt, where the people welcomed him as a liberator and treated him as a living god, a pharaoh. There, he founded a great new city by the sea and gave it his own name, Alexandria. In fact, he founded many cities across his empire and named them all Alexandria, planting his name across the whole known world like seeds. But Alexander was not satisfied. He kept pushing east, further and further, into lands the Greeks had only heard about in legends. He marched all the way to India, fighting fierce armies and even war elephants, and still he won. He wanted to go on. He wanted to reach the very edge of the world. But his soldiers had finally had enough. They had marched for years, thousands of miles from home. They were exhausted, far from their families, and they were afraid. For the first time, his loyal men refused to follow him forward. Alexander was furious. He shut himself away in anger for days. But in the end, even the great conqueror could not fight without his army, and he was forced to turn back. There is a famous legend about Alexander, one that captures his whole soul. They say that when he looked at how much of the world he had conquered, he did not feel joy. Instead, he wept. He wept because he believed there were no more worlds left to conquer. Whether the story is exactly true or not, it tells us something real about him. For Alexander, no amount of glory was ever enough. There was always a hunger that nothing could fill, and it was that endless hunger that brought him, at last, back to the great city of Babylon. He was still a young man, only 32 years old, the master of a vast empire, planning his next great campaign. And then, after a long night of feasting and drinking, he fell ill. A fever took hold of him. Day by day, he grew weaker. The man who had never lost a battle, who had conquered the most powerful empire on earth, now lay in bed, unable to rise. And within just a few days, Alexander the Great was dead. To this day, no one knows for certain what killed him. Some say it was a disease, a fever caught in the marshes near Babylon. Others have always whispered a darker word, poison. Whether it was illness or murder, the result was the same. The greatest conqueror in history was gone, in the prime of his life, with his work unfinished. And here is the most tragic part of all. When his commanders gathered around his bed and asked him who should rule his enormous empire, Alexander, with his last breaths, is said to have given only one answer. To the strongest, he named no clear heir. He left the most powerful empire on earth with no one to hold it together. And so, the moment he died, his most trusted generals turned on each other. They tore his empire apart in long and bloody wars, each one fighting to grab a piece for himself. His own family, his mother, his wife, his young son, were all murdered in the chaos that followed. The empire that Alexander had spent his whole life building fell apart in just a few years. So what do we learn from the dark story of Alexander the Great? We see a man who could conquer anything in the world except his own hunger for more. He won every battle, but in the end he could not control what came after him. He built an empire that did not survive him, yet his name survived for over 2,000 years, all the way to you, right now. He proved that a single person, with enough belief and enough will, can change the entire world. And he also proved that no power on earth, no matter how great, can save you from the one enemy that comes for everyone. Thank you for listening and for learning English with me today. I hope this story was clear and easy to follow. If you enjoyed it, tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. I love to read your messages. And if you want more true stories, told slowly in simple English, then stay with me, because history is full of dark and powerful tales, and together we are only just beginning.